Great. Okay, welcome everyone. Really nice to have you. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Travis. Great to be here. I'm really excited to connect with each of you. I'm going to just get started. I want to get an idea who's all in the room. I would love if you're able to turn camera on. I'm not sure if there's a norm, but we're going to have some interactivity and you're going to learn a little bit about why. So if you can turn cameras on, that's amazing. But first, I'm just going to start in the chat. So tell me, hi Sherry, hi Alex, thank you. Yes, it's just different. We get eye contact, we get faces. Lamont, nice to see you. All right, so the first thing I want to know, because I've got some key principles here, and I want to know actually a little bit about you. Are you a team leader? Are you a solo agent? Are you a broker owner? If you don't mind telling me just really quick in the chat. I know that the Easy Home Search Network is a wide one. Tell me about yourself. Team leader, broker owner, team lead. Awesome. Okay, broker owner, agent on a team. Great. Broker owner. Lots in here. Okay. Hi, Christina. Lots of cameras coming on. Okay, great. So independent loan officer. Okay, great. Agent on a team. Fantastic. Good. Solo agent. Okay, so we are going to cover some core principles. And at the end of the day, they all come down to the same principles, no matter what your role is. And we're going to be talking a fair bit about skill development, behavior training. You would have seen the welcome email that I shared. The chat is going to be open, so if you do have questions, please don't. I'll obviously have Q&A at the end, but don't hesitate to put them in the chat because we will make sure that we get everything answered before we finish up. So today we're going to talk about teaching tells, training sells. Okay, so my background, you would have received my bio possibly in the email intro. I'm with the Justin Have a Real Estate team, the #1 team in Canada with eXp Realty. But my background is in learning design, adult education, and training and development. So today what we're talking about is how we build active skills. So as we kick off this hour with all of you in the room, you are broker owners, team leads, agents on a team, which means you're likely a high performer if you're in this room. I want you to ask yourself, how did you get here today? How did you get to the point where you are today, where you are leading an organization, you are the owner of a broker? And I want you to ask yourself, is it something that you know? Is it information that you have that no one else in your market has? Is it something that you do? Are you able to execute on a specific strategy that other people aren't able to? Or is it in the way that you are able to adapt different challenges that you faced in your career, in your growth trajectory to get here? All right. So think about it. You can put it in the chat if you'd like, but I'm willing to bet that it's all three of these things, right? Because leadership and leadership of yourself, leadership of others really relies on you being able to have all of these things and also being able to pass all of these things on to others if you are in leadership, especially. All right. But most of the training that agents go through to build their skills and to get these results doesn't reflect that, right? So we have lots of team leaders in the room. If you got cameras on, or you can add in the chat, raise your hand if you ever listen to your agent's calls. Who here ever listens to your agent's calls? Lamont, yes, good. Okay, so if you, yes, Alex, awesome. So raise your hand again if you've ever listened to your agent's calls and you like shudder in embarrassment because what you're hearing is not the quality that you stand for. It's not what you shared with them. I got people, yes in the chat, laugh, smiling, okay? So it's not the things you told them how to do, things that you've either told them a million times to do or not to do. So we know this pain, all right? So when you are a team leader or solo agent, it's not about the cost of wasted time and resources. If you share things with people and it doesn't stick, I want you to think about your market. What is the cost of one missed opportunity if you're a solo agent or a team leader, right? Not just the missed opportunity that's on the phone in the moment, but that future referral that would have come from that client. I want you to think about as a team, an organization, a brokerage, what is the cost of one agent who comes and joins your organization because of your sharp recruiting message and all of the efforts that you're doing, and they don't get into production and they have to leave and they haven't been successful, okay? So it is more than just the wasted time and resources. It comes at a high cost to your culture, to the other agents on your team, to your environment, ultimately to your brand and reputation in the marketplace, right? So we, of course, as team leaders or as agents, we try to find out like what isn't working, right? And in 2025, if you haven't noticed, many people are going with the fact that, hey, maybe people just don't want to work anymore. Maybe just the work ethic isn't there anymore, right? We hear that a lot. So we as leaders, we can look at things like low performance, high turnover, And, we can say, hey, this last batch of agents, they just must be no good, right? We've got to get our recruiting message. We're going to go find some better ones. We need to find the disciplined, high-performing agents, find out where the good agents are. But isn't that the same thing? Team leaders, broker owners, especially. Raise your hand if you've ever heard agents tell you these must be bad leads. Have you ever said, yeah, well, it's not me, it's the leads. I'm totally fine. If you give me some better leads, I'll show you what I can do with them. All right. So as leaders, that's the same thing that we're doing when we say to our agents, yeah, our agents, they just don't have the skills. Or as agents, when we say, hey, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. It's not about the leads and it's not about whether you show up with a certain set of skills. It's really about if you know how to develop them. And that's really what we're talking about today. Okay, so first and foremost, where does most agent training go wrong? So I want you to put in the chat, or you can just share with me, hands up, team leaders, broker owners, if you offer any kind of training to your agents. Do you do any training for your agents? Yes. Okay. Solo agents, have you gone through any training to build your skills? Yes, in the chat. Okay. So when we think as leaders, okay, it's time for me to teach and train. And as agents, we say, okay, I'm going to learn my skills. We typically revert back to what we are all most familiar with when it comes to learning, which is like this image here, classroom learning, right? So we look at this and we think, okay, this is how we learn. There's a teacher at the front of the room, front of the classroom, kind of imparting knowledge, sharing wisdom, right? And everyone on the other side is there consuming it, right? Then we put them to a test and we say, okay, did you pass the test? You must be a great student. You must have learned really well, right? So we think of this as how we learn, and we've been told that this is how humans learn. But this type of learning that you as solo agents likely learned your skills through, or team leaders and broker owners, how you're often sharing your skills with agents, this type of learning is actually really recent in history. It's actually fairly new. It was only developed a couple hundred years ago in a place called Prussia. Okay, so Prussia is now where you find Germany, Poland, and Russia. And this style of classroom learning was a military style. Okay, so it was developed by the state and it brought some positives. It was public access to education, wider ranges of literacy, but its main goal, this type of learning, was conditioning. Okay, so it was about creating obedience, compliance. This was a military style, so it was meant to create soldiers. Ultimately, this type of learning was meant to create factory workers, people who would consume whatever knowledge you gave them and then follow rules to use that knowledge in a repetitive way. So this is why, so again, my background's training and development, this is why we still call this the factory model of education, because this is to train those repetitive behaviors of obedience. So fun fact, the classroom bell is actually just the factory bell. Before this whole factory model, people didn't move between tasks at the ring of a bell. They were more self-reliant and they were more focused on the outcome. Okay, so I'm not anti-education, I'm not anti-classroom learning. But as team leaders, it's very important, and as agents yourself learning to build your skills, it's very important to understand how this was designed, right? So what's wrong with that? Right? So if you're team leader in the room, broker owner, like, hey, you'll have like an army of agents doing everything you tell them to do. If you're a solo agent, you're thinking like, hey, just tell me exactly the process and I'll go through it step by step, right? But this is actually the opposite of how you train for sales, right? Because you have soldiers going through the motions. I want you to think of your top producer, if you're a team leader, broker owner, and agents. I want you to think about your skills of when you are most hungry, most ambitious. You're not a factory worker. Your top performers are not factory workers. They are ambitious. They're internally driven. They're creative with their problem solving, right? They're hustlers. They work. But most agent training, so far 100% of the agent training that we've seen is designed this way with that factory model. Okay. So at the end of the day, the big thing that you need to know and why this doesn't work is that real estate is a performance-based field. Meaning you aren't in academia, you're not in research that if you just know the answers, you're going to do well at your job. It's not about what you know, it's about what you can execute with what you know. Okay. So when I talk about that and I'm saying, hey, let's change the way that we learn, let's change the way that we train, does it sound like I'm like reinventing the wheel? Like I'm showing up here with like something? No, okay, Brittany is like agreed. It's not. I'm not reinventing the wheel. Actually, I'm going back to how we have been designed to learn most naturally for almost all of history. Before this whole military style, when we were just producing factory workers who were going to go through all the repetitive tasks working like robots, before that, for thousands of years, we learned in a way that reflects the way we are naturally wired, the way our brains are wired to learn and develop mastery. Learning has been about self-reliance, independent thinking, observation and doing and execution, right? So again, think about what it takes to be successful in sales, communication, relationship building. That's more in line. And really, this is how humans learn best. This is our default mode of learning. So the training format that I'm going to share with you today that you can take, you can start to implement immediately, is more reflected on our natural ways of learning. This is what it would look like long ago. This is going all the way back generation. This is Aristotle's framework, okay? So it was an equally ratioed format of what you know, what you can do, and then your instincts. Okay, so there were three parts to reach your potential. And when you look at learning science today, this stands tried, tested, and true that these are still the natural ways to learn. Okay, so the format that we're going to share today and work through, our modern version, is a combination of knowing. You have to have the knowledge and the logic. You do need to know these things. Doing, you have to have the practical skill because it's a performance-based field. You have to be able to execute on it. And then ultimately instincts. You can't train your agents or learn as an agent how to do one thing a perfect way. You have to learn the principles so that you can adapt it and switch it to many different scenarios, okay? Using this framework, we're going to show and give examples of how you can accelerate your skills for yourself or for your agents to get deep mastery in a far shorter amount of time, right? So as questions come up, we're going to jump into the framework. Make sure that you added any questions into the chat. We'll make sure that we get to it at the end. So the first thing is to know that there is a very big difference between teaching and training. So when you are a team leader and you're thinking, okay, I want to teach my agents, or if you're a solo agent and you're thinking, I want to learn, you have to ask yourself, are you teaching or are you training, or are you being taught or are you being trained? Okay, so I like to think of teaching as like a filling of the mind where you're sharing the information, but training is a very different process. Training is when you actively draw out skills. And remember, as an agent, or if you're a team leader training your agents, this is about getting observable, measurable skills, because that is when you get into production, when you can actually execute. Okay, so the first step is in the knowledge and the logic. So this is what's called the cone of learning. Okay, so this is a very widely used framework, and what it represents is how different styles of learning, different types of learning are retained. Okay, so if you train your agents, or if you're an agent and you have been trained all in a classroom style, you might be able to pass all the tests and repeat information that has been shared with you, but you're actually learning in the most passive way. So this is that lecture style of learning. 5% retention. Now, if you go down actively and you start to activate and move into more performance-based training, then you start to activate this learning and you have more retention towards the end. So this is where most team leaders, broker owners really struggle, and you see them get stuck and go wrong. It's because you want to train your agents and you want to teach them. So you think of it like a classroom style and you share all of this passive classroom teaching information. But what happens is, because it's a performance-based field, you don't get results. So what do? You add more content, you add more lessons, you jump on another webinar, you have another coaching call, tell them to read another book. But ultimately, none of it is getting to the heart of the issue, that if you are in a performance-based field, you need to be training and getting measurable skills coming out of your agents, as opposed to just staying on the surface with all of this information. Okay. The other place where I see a lot of team leaders going wrong, or agents with their own, how they approach their own learning and experience, is in the high cost of cramming. So you see training programs where everything's crammed into the first 2 weeks, and you say, hey, you're going to learn everything you need to know in 2 weeks. Now you can hit the ground running and you can get out there into the field and just start selling. All right. But we are all wired by biology, and our brains are all designed to learn in a certain way. No matter how hard we work, no matter who we are and what our work ethic is, when you learn something, you are designed to forget it. Okay, you're going through so many things in the day by day. You've got your working memory versus your long-term memory. Just because you learn something, you are designed to forget it. So instead of expecting to find a unicorn agent or agents, if you're trying to expect yourself to remember every single thing you consume, you have to remember, you have to approach your skill building for yourself or for your agents with the knowledge that you are going to forget. Okay, this forgetting curve is what this is called. It's not a bad thing. It's just how we are wired, because when you realize how to use it, you realize how you can intentionally move things into long-term memory quickly. So when you have this forgetting curve, so when you get new information, you are wired to forget almost all of it. Okay, so about 10% that you will retain. So when you share something new with your agents, or agents, if you learn something new, you have to expect that it will decay. And then your training, how you actively train to get this information to stick, is that you have to let the information start to fall, and then you have to actively retrieve it. Okay, so if you are training your agents in your brokerage on your team, you want to design it so that they will have to have reps so that they practice kind of forgetting and having to actively recall it again. With each one of these recalls, you can see that after 1, 2, 3, 4 repetitions, then you're moving it into your long-term memory. Team leaders, broker owners, raise your hand if you are working with tons of gotta minutes. You've got all sorts of things that you've already told your agents to do. Okay, so I see nodding. Yes, there you go. Okay, so if you are working with lots of gotta minutes, I guarantee you that when you first introduced the information, we did not have enough of those spaced reps for them to have to figure it out and recall it on their own. So when you do this with intention at the beginning, you free up that time on the front end. You work smarter at the beginning, and then it frees up on the back end. All right. So this doesn't have to be all live time. Sometimes it can be how you incorporate it into your live coaching. Sometimes it can be in your role play if you use tools like Shiloh, peer group practice, solo practice for solo agents who are on a team. There are many ways that you can design this, but know that you want to expect you're going to forget and put yourself into scenarios where you have to actively recall it to move it into your long-term memory, right? So how do you do those reps, right? So if you are doing repetition, it's very important to know when it comes to practice and skill building, repetition is not just doing something over and over again, and practice is not about just doing something over and over again. In fact, repetition is one of the most misunderstood things when it comes to practice. Practicing something every day does not mean that you're going to get better at it. Practicing something every day can actually make you worse at something if you are approaching it in a way where you're reinforcing things that you don't want to stick, right? So if you're trying to find out if you're going from teaching to training, remember, teaching is that passive learning versus training is that actively drawing out of skills. One of the biggest differentiators is that you can find out if it's active learning, but also if you are working with clear, structured frameworks. If you're training your agents, or agents, if you're trying to train a skill in yourself, you need to have structure, and that becomes the vehicle of how you do the repetitions, how you transfer that skill to others, and also how you measure how that skill is growing. This is why sports teams, for example, they run plays, right? You have a model that trains whatever you need to develop, and in the process of running that same play, you're reinforcing strengths, and you're also intentionally exposing weaknesses. This is how you refine, and again, you get sharp skills in a short amount of time. So in the work that we do, we have consistently our new agents who are 3, 4 months in the business are outperforming and outselling and outconverting our seasoned agents who are 10, 15, 20 years in the business, right? And this happens consistently because we're going really deep with a focused, intentional reps that are building skills in a very sharp way in a shorter amount of time, right? So what does the framework look like? So there are many different frameworks, and really the framework changes depending on what it is that you're training, but here's an example of one. So this is our unique value proposition framework. So different frameworks depending on what skills and behaviors that you're working on. So this is simple and versatile example. All of you as team leaders and broker owners, and all of you as solo agents, you need to learn how to communicate the unique value that your team offers, that you offer, how you can solve problems in a different way than others can, right? So how do we normally train that? We tell them what to say, we give them slides, we say maybe go shadow another agent and pick up on kind of nuance of how they deliver. That is going to leave everything at the surface level because you're not actually giving them what it is that they're looking for, versus if you give it a structure, a model that transfers the key elements to the others that need to learn how it converts and how it works. So we start this, for example, with a statement of loss aversion, right? What's at stake? What do you have to lose? And why do we train agents in this way? Because with behavioral psychology, we know that humans will do far more to avoid loss than they will to achieve gain. And if you want to train your agents to be able to take action, which is ultimately what being an agent is all about, you're guiding these transitions and these big life changes throughout all of this. You have to be able to communicate and guide and support action. Your agents and you need to know how to activate this feeling of loss aversion. Okay, so 95% of decisions are made on the subconscious level. So training your agents to activate those emotions. Then you communicate the unique value. So there's a difference between just listing all the features and feature dumping and talking about all what's great about what you do. You connect it to that loss aversion about how you as an agent or you as a team can solve that problem or help them avoid that loss in a way that nobody else in the market can. It makes it a market of one, right? And then lastly, to future pace. Again, if you think about your skills as an agent or the skills that you need your agents to have if you're a team leader, it's about them being able to activate those emotions. So you give them the structure of they need to know how to future pace and have them feel what they will feel like when they close that loop and they avoid that tension. Okay. The very simple structure: trigger the loss aversion, activate emotion, give them the cognitive bridge of how they're going to be able to solve that problem with you that they can't do anywhere else, and then activate the emotion of how they'll feel because of it. So this structure and this principle can be used to communicate 50 different things that you offer on your team or as an agent. And 10 different people here in this room could communicate something different in 10 different ways. But because it's a training framework, you can use the structure to measure whether or not it was effective and whether or not all of the components have been transferred to the other person. Does that make sense so far? Yes, good, good. Okay, so it's an example. Every framework that you give is different depending on what skill and behavior you're aiming to train, but we'll come back to it. That's one example. Let's go to the second piece, which is practical skill. So the first step when you as an agent are learning or you as a team leader are needing your agents to learn is how do you get that knowledge to stick and how do you get it to be retained in a way that they can then move it to this next step, which is application. So that second step is about the doing. This is that practical skill. This is where all the mastery and execution happens. This is where you pull the lever on how fast you can get results from your agents. Again, we have another team who they've just done, 60 deals in the last month with 11 agents, many of which who are new to the industry, right? So we're looking at how well you can get them into production quickly and consistently and effectively. How do you train razor sharp skills? So the first thing we need to talk about though with this is training behavior, right? So if we are in the business of real estate, this is about can we move our people? People move the business, right? How as leaders do we move our people? If you're a solo agent, how do you move yourself? We all know that there's an internal battle of like, how can I train my own behavior? This is something we come across every day. So the concept of training behavior is something that has been studied for all of history, right? But it really came to fruition and to kind of popular awareness in the 1950s and 1960s with something called behaviorism. And behaviorism is when they finally decided and realized by training things like rats, animals like rats and pigeons, they realized, hey, we can train behavior. And maybe all learning is really just training behavior. So they put rats and pigeons and other animals, and they put them into situations where they decided that they could train their behavior based on the rewards and the consequences that they gave them. If they did something that they wanted, they would give them a treat. If they did something that they didn't want, they would zap them with some electricity or give them some sort of consequence. And in doing that, they learned, hey, we can train these behaviors. So what happened is they quickly applied that to us as humans as well. So this goes back to, it's an extension of that factory model, right? So we've learned like soldiers to work in classrooms and aim to pass our tests, but they applied the principles of behaviorism through all of schooling and all of work. And they said, hey, if you do something that you want, that's good, we're going to give you a prize. And if you do something that's not good, we're going to give you a penalty, right? And so it's all about these rewards and these consequences. And for many years, people just thought, hey, that's how we train behavior. All right. So team leaders, especially in the room, I'm going to ask you first, have you ever had where you're just like, I'm giving my agents, I'm telling them exactly what to do, but I need them to take the action. That's where you're getting stuck. Okay. So it comes to this, how can I train this behavior? So many will put this type of principle. I'll give them rewards if they do something good, and I'll give them a punishment if they do something that's not good. Right. But there are two different types of behaviors, two big categories of behaviors. There's what's called the rule-based behaviors or algorithmic behaviors and adaptive behaviors and heuristic behaviors. All right. So rule-based behaviors are things that are repetitive. They're predictable. They're, of course, based on rules. They're a low cognitive load. You don't really have to think about a creative solution. You just have to do the thing. They're routine, they're systematic. Does this kind of remind you of like those factory workers that we talked about earlier, right? So these are rule-based behaviors. That's one category of behavior. The other type of behavior is what's called an adaptive behavior. An adaptive behavior are creative solutions, coming up with solutions even if the path isn't clear. Critical thinking, really picking up on nuance and details and deciding for yourself as you go. Problem solving, hitting roadblocks and finding solutions. Ultimately, adaptive behaviors are where you find all your qualitative output. So it's not just the fact that you went through the motion. It's not just that you made the calls. It's about the quality of how you converted on the calls and how you executed with your skills on the calls. They're creative, they're flexible. So when you look at these two categories, which one you can put in the chat, which one is your top producing agent? Which behaviors relies more and will lead more to being that top producer, that high production? Just think of like the adaptive behaviors. Okay. So think of the top producers, think you as leaders, think you as solo agents. How did you get to where you are? It's all of these adaptive behaviors. All right. But remember, the way that they trained these pigeons and these rats is all with rewards and consequences. When you train behaviors, that's perfect for rule-based behaviors. If you're training those factory workers and just do the thing that I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. If you're training adaptive behavior, those rules and those rewards and consequences have the opposite effect on their motivation, their drive, and their quality. All right. So there are many different examples of research, but the three big ones to see different scenarios. They had kids who were putting out a high quality of drawing and they were creating and they were really figuring things out. And then someone came along and said, "Hey, I'll give you $20 or I'll give you a prize every time you draw a really great picture." What happened to their drive to create more? It went down, Lamont. You got it. Okay. Same thing they did in a work scenario. People were doing their work and they were doing really well, but they said, "Hey, you're doing it really well. I'm glad you're excited about it. I'm going to give you an extra $100 every time you do it well again, every single day." What happened? Same thing, went down. People were donating blood because they wanted to. They wanted to help other people. It was coming from an internal drive to like, I want to be a better person. And they said, "Okay, great. I'm going to give you $50 now every time as a bonus." What happened? It took away from their drive to want to be better. You replace that internal drive and that internal behavior that this job and this industry relies on, and you replace it with the prize that you gave them. All right. So there's a rule in this that you never pay for internal drive. If you're trying to motivate your agents, if you're trying to motivate yourself, you want to make sure that you're activating what's within you. And leaders, how we do this, and solo agents, how you do this, it's all based on your experiences. There's myths when it comes to training behavior. That money is the best motivator. Just with the examples I just shared you, money is not the best motivator. In fact, many times it can take away from what the best motivator truly is, right? One size fits all that you can just say, "Hey, we're all going to have this challenge and everyone's going to care about this challenge," right? Praise always being valuable. This one can seem counterintuitive, but praise is actually a type of kind of reward. It's like a prize that you give people. And if it's not warranted and if it's not earned, you actually strip away by making it all about how you're giving them a pat on the back for something that they didn't actually do that deserved it and they know it, right? Fear and pressure always driving results. Again, not the case. There are things that have to come into play with pressure and resistance that we'll talk about next, but these are myths that many people come up to when it comes to how can I train this behavior in myself and with others. So how do you train this behavior? Ultimately, and there's a whole framework for it, but ultimately it comes down to designing the experiences where we can train activating our internal drive through experiencing resistance. Okay, so putting yourself into scenarios, think about what happens when you are playing a game or a competition or something where you're really having to struggle through that resistance that you feel in the performance gap that you're experiencing. That is where you train discipline. That is when you train behaviors. That is when you train how they will move forward and make decisions. You have to create the resistance. So for team leaders and broker owners, what this looks like is you design your training experiences so that they will feel that challenge in really intentional ways. And they are forced to kind of go through and have those experiences and they build those skills. They rewire those neural pathways. They know what to do. For you as a solo agent, same thing. It's when you come up against these feelings of friction, know that that is actually where the training begins. So again, it's the difference between teaching and training. Teaching, I can passively consume knowledge all day long. You can tell me something and I'll smile and agree and say, "Yeah, that sounds great." But whether or not I can actually do it and I'm actually living that is only going to become a reality when I'm put in a situation where I'm actually put in resistance and I have to put that into play. Does that make sense? Yes. When you're thinking about what that looks like in your day to day, What we do with this in training, it's called an experiential learning structure. So what your live training structure looks like, it's not just about the teaching, right? So again, teaching, it's like you're in the classroom, if they pass a test, wow, they must be great. Teaching is one component of the learning process. You have to make sure that you prime people, your agents or yourself, for what it is that you need to learn, right? Many people make this mistake where they say, okay, I've got this amazing goal that I'm going to share with my agents, or I'm going to learn. I just read this book, it's amazing. But you can only learn what you are ready to learn. If you bring some amazing gold to your agents, but they aren't ready to receive it, it's going to go over their heads. Okay, so you have to prime them, which includes preparing, helping them anchor for what they're about to receive, helping them learn or unlearn what they need to before you give them this new teaching. Then teaching is, of course, a component. If you remember that cone of learning, it's like the top of the cone, it's where things start. You have to understand the concepts of what it is you're going to put into practice. But then it's moving through live experience of applying what you learned. Then it's moving through experimentation and adapting, which is really where you get to feel a lot of this resistance of like, hey, you can do it. Can you do it in many different scenarios? And then ultimately reflection. So when it comes to adult learning, especially, so adult learning is different than youth learning in many ways, but a lot of it is emotional in that you have to give autonomy and empowerment to adults who are learning. You can't just approach them like kids and say, okay, you have to learn this, you have to do it this way, and just do it because I told you to. As a child, we want that direction and we want to be told exactly what to do. As adults, we want that guidance too, but you need to have the autonomy where they are owning their learning process. So that's a big key to it. Okay. If you have to remember how to put this into a concept for yourself, know that your skills and behaviors are all trained through resistance. If you want to get stronger in the gym, what do? Not only do you do more reps, but you add more weight, right? You have to create that resistance and all of the skills and behaviors that you want for yourself or leaders that you want to install into your agents. It comes in a fast pace and in an intentional way when you apply that resistance and you essentially make it harder. All right. So when agents join our team, or agents, if you're training yourself and you're putting yourself through a growth experience, it is important that you let them know. We let them know that they will be experiencing this challenge. So this is a little excerpt from one of our orientation presentations. And we tell them, hey, when you join our team, step one is that you're going to learn the information. Great. Just like you're in the classroom, you're going to learn the concepts. But right away, you're going to be focusing almost all of your time here in challenging yourself, making it harder, putting yourself to the test in execution, and then ultimately learning how to reflect so that you understand what you did. So it's about you and you owning your growth experience as opposed to me just telling you what to do. Resistance reaps results. You want to add constraints to make it harder. Now, these are different scenarios. We can talk about it in Q&A, but how do you build a skill? You find a way to make it harder. So that UVP framework, for example, that we had, where they can communicate the loss aversion, the unique value, and the future pace emotion of what you'll feel. What if they can do that well? And they say, okay, good, I'm done. I must be an expert agent. You say, no, you make it harder. Can you adjust your message based on their pain points? Can you say it in a shorter amount of time? Can you say it in an uncomfortable environment? Can you say it without knowing anything about who you're speaking to? All these different things, you add these little levers where you make it more challenging. And in doing that, that's how you get your new agents or agents of every level rapidly accelerating the way that they can build their skill. All right. This is what this quote means. Any Bruce Lee fans in the room? But he's got so many great quotes. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. So instead of finding 20 different books to read and telling your agents to read and 50 different strategies and coaching calls to get on, find the thing that's going to move the needle. And instead of finding 20 things and going one layer deep, find one thing and go 20 layers deep, and you will see rapid results in yourself or in your agents. Okay, last one is the adapting. All right, so you've got the knowledge. You do have to start with the knowledge, and you can see it's equal parts to then you have to be able to apply, and you have to apply in an intentional way where you are shaping that mastery with razor sharp skills. This is how you get into production quickly, consistently, and get rapid results in a performance-based field. The last one is going to be my favorite, which is adapting. All right. So it is not enough to learn the skills. If you want to streamline your training, first of all, if you're a team leader, broker, owner, but if you are a solo agent and you want to get massive results in a short amount of time, You want to approach your skills in a way that will make it adaptable. You need to train adaptable skills and instincts. Now, when we say that in training and development, many people will say, like, well, how do you train instincts? Some people just have instincts and have different instincts than others. Instincts are absolutely something that you can train. If you think about what instincts are, they're all things that you've developed through experiences, right? So things like pattern recognition, a judgment, your own decision making, right? So how do you train this? Again, you have to train it and build it by putting yourself in situations where you are training to adapt. So first of all, why does adaptability matter? If you are in real estate, if you are on sales, anything people to people that relies on communication and emotional activation as much as this does, every client and situation is different. You can go on YouTube and find an amazing script and it will break immediately as soon as there's a difference in the way that they communicate or how they receive that information, right? Scripts will fail. Pattern recognition needs to be flexible by definition to be able to find out what those patterns are. And ultimately, this comes back to that behavior training that we talked about. If you want internal drive in yourself and in your agents who are in your organization, you need to train adaptability. You can't just say, do it my way, do it this way, and then you've got it. You have to train them of always looking for those feedback loops, right? Remember, there's those rule-based behaviors and those adaptive behaviors. This is where all of this really takes place. So what does it look like when you train adaptability? Once again, you do it with structure. So this is an example. There's many different adaptability structures that we do. But again, this is an example for that first UVP framework that I shared with you at the beginning. The UVP of the loss aversion, unique value, and the future pace. If you learn how to communicate that really well to one person, it doesn't mean that it's going to resonate with the other person, because the rule of communication is communication relies on the person receiving it, not the person giving it. It's all about how is that received. And one of my favorite quotes is the one that says something along the lines of, the funniest thing that ever was the biggest mistake people make with communication is believing that it took place. Right? It's like just because you said all the things doesn't mean that the other person received all of the things. Okay. So you have to train yourself and you have to train your agents to be able to adapt your communication. So structure, we use this because remember, you need structure to be able to train and transfer it to others, is what we call the four thinkers. Okay. So you have four different types of thinkers. Everyone's kind of a mix of all, but typically we'll lean towards one or the other, that we really like to receive our communication when we are making big decisions. And again, you're training your agents or you're training yourself to be able to guide people through these big decisions. So four different types of thinkers. First is the analytical thinker. So an analytical thinker is someone who resonates with statistics, with numbers, with cause and effect. You can say anything that you can put in a spreadsheet, their brain is going to go, okay, that makes sense. Next is a structural thinker. A structural thinker is someone who you can give them all those details of like the statistics and cause and effect, but ultimately I want to know the three-part system. Say things like, yeah, okay, at the end of the day, just know there's 4 steps for you to get your house sold. This is how we do that. Okay, that's a structural thinker. Their brain feels really good to hear things like that communicated. A conceptual thinker is that big point thinker. So you can tell them the details, you can tell them about your processes, but at the end of the day, they just want that big sweeping statement. At the end of the day, more families choose Justin Have a Real Estate Team than any other team in Calgary. That's what they care about. Get to the big point, right? And then the last is the social thinker. Social thinker, they can tell them the details, tell them the dollars and the stats and the big sweeping selling statements, but ultimately they want to know, how does it affect other people? How does it affect my role in the community? How does it affect relationships? All right. Raise your hand if you think you're an analytical thinker. No one? Okay, Mitchell, okay. Raise your hand if you think you're a structural thinker. You love to hear, like, tell me the 3-part process and my brain feels good. Okay, raise your hand if you think you're a conceptual thinker. Like you just want to hear the big point. Lamont, Brittany, okay, so that tends to be like a visionary thinker. It's like, what's the big picture kind of thing? And raise your hand if you think you're a social thinker. Like, tell me all the details, but I want to know how it impacts my relationship. Christina, Charlie, Myrna, did you have one? Do you know which one you are? Or you're thinking. I don't think you raised your hand. So you can be a mix of all four. You can add it to the chat if you think of one. Ultimately, you have to know what you like to communicate. Yeah, it's often a combination, okay? You need to know how you like to communicate because you are most likely to communicate value points in that style to other people. But it's not about your style of communication. You need to be able to adapt it to the other person who's receiving the information. That's when you get sharp agents and agents yourself who you can drop into any situation and you're always picking up how is this going to land on the other side? Not just what am I saying because I practiced it so many times at home. All right, this is what this quote means. Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. If you'll notice, anytime that you're training, it's all about giving it that structure so that you can measure if it's being transferred and you can measure how well it's serving you. All right. Okay. At the end of the day, teaching tells, training sells. This comes from the standpoint of being leaders. If you are training your agents, ask yourself if you are actually training your agents or if you're sitting up at the front of the classroom teaching them. And if you are a solo agent yourself, if you are building skills for yourself or you're trying to model from someone that you're learning from, ask yourself, are you learning in a passive consumption versus you're actually training active skills in yourself, right? Okay. I've got a resource here for you that summarizes how we transfer performance-based training, but I want to open up for questions. We've got 15 minutes. We've covered a fair bit from teaching styles to learning styles to adaptive styles to communication. So I think we have a small enough group that if you were to just unmute, you can obviously put it in the chat as well. But let her rip. Who wants to go first? Questions, thoughts, insights, anything that was new? Should I call from Bailey? How to
You stumped him.
Yeah, that's so when you're learning, like this is can be often a paradigm shift for many, right? Because if you're thinking if you've approached, or how about this? Who has approached their training as team leaders? Team leaders in the room. Who has offered training to others? Okay, so Brittany, Alex. Okay, so I'm gonna just invite you, and Lamont, I'm gonna invite you as leaders. You can unmute. Tell me about how this resonates with your training. Have you done classroom style training? Do you do classroom plus role play? Or have you gone through experiential learning? Let's just start the discussion there.
As I'd say for me, I speak in frameworks. I talk a lot. Like I'm
Yeah,
not a script person. I'm arrows in the quiver person.
awesome.
But I'm definitely training by telling.
Yeah,
And I try to ask questions and bring it in, but I'm sure I stifle the overall creativity and then wonder why some of my team members don't have it.
yeah.
And I think they're in fear of it. They're in fear of using their own creativity because they're like, oh, I've got to follow this process and I've got to do this step. So,
That's exactly it. Okay, so that's great. So, I mean, the fact that you're already recognizing that, hey, I speak in frameworks, this is how I think, right? So, I think it, like, if are you kind of a structural thinker? Does that kind of resonate with you a little bit, like structural analytical? Maybe it's okay. You don't have to put a label on it. It's really just
mhm.
but knowing like where that communication is kind of guided towards. It's really what that is about. But that means you're already partway there. But now it's the next step of how do you guide them from that framework that you gave them to get to the deeper levels of application. And for us as leaders, it can be tricky because we want to keep giving and we keep thinking, I got to show up with something new. I've got to tell you what's the new. You're thinking deeper in information, but you want to think deeper in activation for
Mm.
them, right? So having that framework and guiding them through the process of, sorry to make you dizzy, but this one here, where you teach it to them, right? You set them up and you teach it to them, but then you say, okay, how can I measure if they know what I'm doing? Right. So when you're thinking performance-based training, you don't ask yourself what they need to know. You ask, what do they need to be able to do? So when we think are like working like a school classroom, we do what's called content focused training, where you think, here's what you need to know. I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to have you repeat it back to me, maybe even write it down, and then I can say, okay, great, you got it, you know it, right? But performance based is what's called learner centered. It's all about what they can do. So when you ask yourself, what do my agents need to be able to do? You're going to have where they are now and where the gap is, right? Now, to close that gap, some of what they need is knowledge, but some of it is practice and skills. Some of it might be behavior. Some of it might be resources, right? Like not everything is better as a live training. Sometimes if they're doing a contract review and you need to train them to do that well, you need to give them a great PDF that's going to be a checklist that they can reference. And that's the behavior that you're checking, right? And so when you do that, you're going to say you're probably doing a great job of that first step of that knowledge that you're giving them at the beginning. But you need to ask, how can they put that into application and demonstrate that they know what they're doing? And then how can I put them in a scenario where they can demonstrate the behavior needed to show that they know what I'm talking about? Does that make sense? Yes. And then
Does
the deepest step, it would be, how can they analyze in others when a more seasoned agent who's gone through your training can go to others and say, hey, good, you got that skill, but you need that behavior, and they can analyze in others. That's when you really know they're starting to get on that deeper level.
mastery.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. Good. Okay, Brittany Lamont, I'm going to come to you. Um,
Yeah,
hi.
I'll
Yeah.
go. So my operations manager is on here. A few weeks ago, I just told her to scrap our Wednesday sales meeting, the template we had. We had our
Yeah.
agents coming to us saying, we need to learn this, learn this. And I noticed we would teach one subject and go somewhere else, and they weren't really becoming experts at it. So I was like,
Yeah.
Charlie, do away with all of that. We're just going to go very tactical and do. So this morning,
Yeah.
we actually did a group role play practice where it's just focused on asking deeper, better questions. And
Great.
I literally got text messages saying today's meeting was awesome. Just having us
Yes.
do that, practice on our toes, different ways of how, Chase, who's more experienced versus Kenya, our broker, would have approached a client was very good.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
we've fallen into the trap of lecturing and telling just because
Yeah.
that's how we grew up, like learning.
Yeah. Totally.
But I noticed that they actually get better by having them do it and then correcting them in real time.
100%. So when you get that feedback loop, and what the big thing that I'm sure you're hearing from them, whether or not they're saying them in those words, but they almost are, is that's where the confidence happens. Right? Because the thing is if you are constantly telling them the information, like if you even came back to it, they're going to start to feel like, oh, Brittany already taught me that. And now I'm kind of embarrassed. I still don't know how to use that. Right? So that confidence, it actually depletes the way that they can ask questions, the way that they can feel good about themselves, because everyone's sitting under the burden of like, we've talked about all these things. We've read 50 books on this topic, and I still don't feel like I know what I'm doing. Right? Versus getting a chance to apply. So the next step of that is getting really intentional about what those questions are, right? Because like, hey, asking better questions, right? Help them pinpoint, give them the awareness of what makes a good question, right? Like, so for example, when you're asking questions, are they finding out the pain points of that person, and do they know that that's what's going to drive them to action? And are they activating similarities? There's the psychology of just human beings are so attracted to people who are like them. If you can find ways that you're similar, it can be many ways. The foods you like to eat, where you're from, what you took in school, if you have kids or not, any of those things. When you activate that, you know that you are 35% more likely to say yes to someone who you look at as like you, right? For many different reasons, right? So you get intentional about your agents, like, hey, don't just ask questions, or yes, ask better questions, but now let's make it specific. Let's keep kind of narrowing down on what makes that a good question, because then they'll be able to say, yeah, I can ask 20 different questions and get the information that I need to drive them to action, right?
Love it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So you're again already experiencing the fact that like, hey, I don't need to. And then for us as leaders, you don't have to show up every day with like the night before a meeting, watching a YouTube video, reading a book, and like, what's the new magical strategy? Because none of them are going to be a magical strategy. You really just want to zero in on what are those core things that you know are going to get them into production, right? Good.
Yes.
Yes, awesome, exciting. Lamont, anything you want to add? Starting with the team leaders, broker owners.
No, so I like what Brittany said, and we've kind of moved towards doing more group things because I find whenever I train a new agent, we do one-on-one. So I try to meet them where they are and kind of learn what best way to instruct them.
Yeah,
But then I realized that I always end up in group settings, I always end up repeating myself. We already talked about this, like you just said. So we've
yeah.
gotten into the habit recently of group practice, like group role play and stuff like that. So that what you mentioned today hits right on the head. And that's kind of why I jumped in today, because I wanted to see I've never seen it laid out like it was laid out today. So
Yeah, great. I'm so glad. So great instincts, Lamont, on the fact that like, hey, I don't think the one-on-one is so there's a misconception that one-on-ones are going to be a higher quality. It's not the
mhm.
case. And especially I want you to think, when you think of what a performance-based skill is, which is what sales is, I want you to think like if you were learning a sport, hockey, basketball. How much can you learn? You can, of course, practice on your own, but eventually you have to learn with others. So that's one of the examples of it. But it's not just in the team, it's when you get people in a social learning environment. what you do is you allow them to move through at these different layers. So if you have someone who's learning something for the first time, the person who is already in the depth of like demonstrating and really understanding it is still learning through that observation. This person who's learning through for the first time is learning by watching them demonstrate, right? Who's getting fed into those who are analyzing and giving feedback, right? So we always recommend, strongly recommend cohort training. And anytime that you can do things in a group, you always want to because of the social learning and how much it feeds into just organic observation plus cognitive learning, all of these things that happen, right? The other piece of that is for you as a learner, as a leader, pardon me, if you have a one-on-one with someone, and let's say you do have a one-on-one that's like an amazing session, and you walk out of there and you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, those days when you're like, where did that come from? I was on fire today. What did I tell them, right? Nobody else gets that. Nobody else gets that. It stops at them, right? So we do everything from like our presentations, they go into recorded banks where everyone can watch and they can see the different demonstrations, right? Plus you do it live. Plus you have work that you do on your own and you practice. And all of that is again, that natural, organic way of like how we as human beings have learned best and optimally and pursued mastery for thousands of years, long before we were all forced to sit in a classroom, right? Yeah, really good instincts. All right, any other questions? Ian, any solo agents on the call?
Carmen, I actually have a question too.
Yes, yeah, you bet.
So the one I said, by the way, this is fortuitous. If you saw what I was typing into ChatGPT before this call, it's like
Nice.
pretty wild. But
Careful, ChatGPT doesn't always, yeah, okay, sorry, go on.
no, it was more for I did it as a research to find articles on some stuff.
Nice.
What I realized was I literally just came across this today, which was pretty wild. I've been doing this a while, and what I came across was that my agents are actually, as much as they don't necessarily love the initial calls, right? What they call cold calls, even though they're inquiries, and I consider them warm calls, they're
Yeah.
actually easier and faster to go to those than the nurture calls from somebody they've already spoken to and had, built rapport with. And
Yeah.
the reason being, and this never really dawned on me, because again, like you mentioned, different personalities, is that the initial calls are easier because they're non-threatening. Like maybe they get hung up on, maybe they get told to F off or something like that, but okay, no big deal. But if they
Yeah,
call somebody that they already built rapport with, they have an
totally.
opportunity to screw it up if they don't know what to bring. So they have this hesitation to call the people back, but by having that hesitation, they are in fact then screwing it up because they're not
100%.
calling.
Yeah.
But my question for you in this all is just from a leadership standpoint, being realistic with ourselves
Mhm.
as to those that just want it but don't want it, right? I call it wish it. So I see private jets fly over my head all the time because I live near the airport, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I want one of those, but my work is not aligned with the
Yeah.
ability to get that jet. So I really wish it, not want it. And
Yeah.
so in these different resources that you're talking about, there has to be some level of internal motivation to say, I'm going to dive into these resources. I'm going to listen to these calls. I'm going to go on to Shiloh and do some role playing. So how do you
Yeah.
either take that reality of what it
Yeah.
is or push them to do it?
Yeah, so the great question, great question. So on the slide where I was talking about the resistance. Do you remember that one? I can pull it
Hmm.
up.
Yep.
Ultimately, discipline is kind of what you're talking about is discipline. Discipline is something that you train. Okay, so that is something that is important to know is that discipline is not something that you have or you don't have. And kind of what I'm hearing you ask is kind of like, well, what if at the end of the day they really don't want it bad enough, right? So the first thing is that if someone's not doing something, often one of the biggest reasons is that they can't see the path for how to do it. Right. So it's like you need to want it. You need to have more drive. But then it's like, what does that mean? Like, what am I driving towards? What is it? You say I have to have a certain amount of calls, but like the measure isn't clear. So often, if there's any ambiguity, it will shut people down. Right. Um, the way that now the other practical approach is that you approach every single thing, like what you just said, there's a skill and there's a behavior there. So, for an example, our agents, when they join the team and what we do in agent development is the first people that they have to call is their SOI list. And the reason for that are two things. It's the skill of you have to learn how to integrate the value of what you do and where you work and how you work to people who you already know, and you have to be able to integrate it naturally at a family barbecue and at a soccer game, right? Without hesitation, without sounding awkward. And it also trains the behavior that you have to talk about it to people that you already have lots at stake. And when they join, some of our existing agents, they join with an SOI list of 300 people. They have to call every single person and talk about their value that they offer. Because if they don't call their leads, they're not going to call your leads. But the behavior and the resistance that you put them through in that is like, hey, this is awkward, this is embarrassing, but I'm going to call my cousin who I grew up with and had sleepover, and I'm going to call him and tell him, hey, do you need a house? And I'm not in those words, obviously, but it feels awkward for them. So if you isolate what is the point of resistance, the behavior is that they're hesitating at calling those people who it's awkward and they have past existing relationships with, and the skill of them being able to integrate it naturally. So that's actually our first milestone. Then in the design of the training, like if I had time to show you the whole portal design, it's a very clear milestone, a performance gap that they have to close that gap before they have access to ponds. Right? So when you say, I need you to make more calls, it's not really about more calls. Yes, the volume is there in our prospecting sessions, but even that, we're helping them reverse engineer and see, what does the volume have to do with your output? What does the volume have to do if your conversion rate is low? And you're giving them connecting the dots, because my belief is that if someone wants something, if you truly want that private jet, it's probably that you don't totally want that jet as much as you want other things, right? So I'm not saying it about you. If they want it and they see a clear line of how to do it, that's the only time that they're actually in the decision making of seat of going, yes, I'm going to go forward.
That makes a lot of sense.
Does that make sense? So every single thing that you want, so you kind of just did it right there, Alex. What do they need to be able to do? And then if you pay attention, if you watch this recording, everything that you outlined, you said there are behaviors and you listed the skills. And right there, that's how you design your training. You find those performance gaps, and then obviously it comes into the whole design. If I had more time, I could show you the whole portal, but you can see in that playbook I shared, right? But then it becomes on how you go through that process so that by the end, they have everything that they need. You've designed and you've kind of wired all that in there.
Awesome.
That
Thank
answer
you.
your question? Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Charlie, Ian, I know I didn't get to. I started with Teams. Anyone whose camera off? Feeling good? Okay. There is a playbook in the chat that gives kind of some ideas of how you transfer it. I gave my contact information if you want to add me on Instagram, LinkedIn, any of those things. Feel free to reach out, Facebook. Ian, review the presentation. Yes, Bailey, I believe you're sharing the recording, right? So you'll have the recording. I'm not speaking at Conversion Con, but I highly recommend everyone join Conversion Con. They have amazing speakers and they always do a great job. So I'm
I
sure
was
they.
hoping I would get to hear you speak. Just
No, I
everything you
would.
said was excellent.
Thank you. I do speak regularly at like Sheplack's event. Like I was at Sheplack Tahoe. I'm speaking at EXPCon, like all these different things. But follow me on and connect with me. Add me on Facebook. I'd love to stay in touch with each of you.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Carmen. Really
Okay.
appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you all, and take care. We'll talk to you soon.
We'll
Okay,
see you
bye-bye.
guys in next
Bye.
week for Shut Up and Dial. Bye, guys.
See you. Bye-bye.